We know Richard Rogers, now Lord Rogers of Riverside, for the Pompidou Centre in Paris, 1971, and the Lloyd's Register headquarters in the City of London, 1988. Today, his practice thrives on the work of 200 staff, led by the two partners whose names were added to the practice in 2007. Ivan Harbour, his Maggie's Centre in London, and Terminal 4 at Madrid Airport both won the Sterling Prize. And Graham Stirk, born in Leeds, a good drawer at school, later a scholarship student at the Architectural Association, who was introduced to Richard Rogers in the early 1980s and never looked back. Nearly 4 decades later, Graham Stirk takes the credit for projects such as No. 1 Hyde Park and the Leadenhall building, the wedge that became to Londoners the cheese grater.
But this building is interesting. Having worked on Lloyd's of London 30 odd years earlier, this was a speculative office building that had no known end user at that time. We were opposite the most bespoke headquarters building for a world organisation on the opposite side of the road. And the prospect is terrifying. When, the budget similarities of the legibility of Lloyd's, which is a beautiful diagram, as you probably know, and how does one manifest that same level of clarity of communicating and celebrating everything that's necessary to make a modern building work. It's a trip around the Science Museum, slightly more elegantly presented. The prospect is terrifying, and the whole mechanisms, cost profiles, regulations, everything have all changed since then, so we have to kind of keep moving with each of those shifts to see whether we could actually... We can't replicate it, but we can still be as communicative with what it is we're trying to design.
The Leadenhall building was adjusted during its design to lean back. Why? To protect views of St Paul's Cathedral. It was just one of the moments that gave Graham Stirk sleepless nights.
I suppose at that time we fill our site. Historically, building towers was always about being able to give the residual amount of site over to public space. This had to create something unusual that would create a lot more permeability, where I now work in the City of London, it is incredibly congested public realm. It's too valuable for anything to be given up, so the creation of something that could begin to create incidental spatial drama as one moves through the streets is important. So essentially it's a creation of public realm in section rather than plan, so you can't see the public space from the air. Confidence comes with you at different particular stages when things are going well. It's a temporary fleeting thing. It's a real drag, if I was honest. It's a real drag. And I suppose there are times when you talk in hindsight of how exciting and fantastic. There are other times when it's really difficult, really ugly, and stressful. But in a sense, you are part of a much wider process. I suppose it's trying to maintain some sense of integrity within a much wider field of decision-making processes that are involved in large-scale buildings.
The Leadenhall building took 14 years of Graham Stirk's life, from 2000 to 2014. But in 2004, he also started sketching something very different, a new winery for a cooperative in the Ribera del Duero region of Spain. Looking back, we can see some of the shapes he would later use on the distillery in Scotland.
I think it's important sometimes to have a very powerful philosophic approach, which doesn't necessarily mean that you're producing a particular style of building that you then wish to kind of test against lots of different typologies. So building an agro-industrial shed in Protos was, well, we'll make a very, very beautiful noble shed. And it's beautifully expressive of how it's made. It communicates through glass where people can see the processes that take place. It creates a very, very beautiful public realm. Most of these buildings have to have a relationship, not only to those that are using the building, but also those that don't use it. So we have to oscillate between the expectations of our client and the wider expectations of society.
The winery in Spain was designed for the weather. Graham Sturck could afford to make a light structure. In Scotland, something chunkier would be required. And it would be bigger, much bigger. It would be unique.
I mean, for us, we're trying to, like everyone, we're trying to find a relevant vocabulary for the 21st century.
Perhaps the greatest challenge in the art of architecture is ensuring that what you draw is what you get. It's one thing to conceptualize a building, from the initial sketch through computer renders to the technical drawings that will be used on site. It's quite another to be there when your design is executed. And the road to that point can be very long.
There were many challenges over the way. It's a scheme of very high ambition, located in a fairly remote part of the country. It required the absolute commitment of everybody involved, from all of the design team, the client principally, who had the original ambition to do something quite different within the industry, down to all of the contractors involved. I think the level of coordination that has been achieved, which was something that we aspired to do collectively as a team, is a testament to that commitment and hard work that everybody put in. That's sort of manifesting in two distinct areas, I think. First of all is the integration between the process equipment, the actual whiskey making equipment, and the hardware of the building, if we will. Both within the logistic coordination of bringing all of this production equipment into place, the various integration of the computer modelling that was used and exchanged both between the building shell and core design team and the process engineers and foresights who were leading the design and installation of the process equipment. That I think is fantastic, and the way in which all the process equipment sits within this open grillage gantry floor is something to be seen. And then the coordination of the timber roof. So the timber roof with its primary steel support and the concrete is similarly the integration coordination required for those three component parts to come together in the location, potentially in the weather, working at height. I think they were some real challenges which were set to the whole team. All the timbers coming from Austria, the primary steelworks made in just outside York, so that final level of design integration was essential. And then the physical tolerances of bringing these component parts together. No one wanted to be the weak link that drops the ball.
The art of architecture became the art of construction, as the engineers took Graham Sturck's design and created it on the ground, including the unique timber roof.
Timber is a particularly appropriate material here because it is lightweight, and in engineering you can actually reach a situation where you're putting material in to hold material up. So what we did was to make the permanent structure as light as we could, and also take advantage of the geometry because there is inherent stiffness in the geometry. However, the concrete structure, the bit that retains the earth, is almost completely divorced from the timber roof. That is to say, the roof sits on the concrete. It's quite often the case that the walls that hold the earth back will be resisted by the roof. We completely didn't want that. So any lateral force, any disturbing force of the roof is taken by this steel structure here. So it could be snow that's banked heavily on one side, it could be the wind, it could be some thermal movement, several things. But the whole of the lateral resistance is taken in this frame here. And this frame has two purposes. One is to take the lateral load, the other one is to take the vertical load. So vertical load, lateral load goes here. Only vertical load goes into the surrounding structure. And what that means is that the timber can be as light as we can possibly make it because we're not imposing extraneous forces from the earth on it.
Artists' impressions and models can only go so far. As the actual building emerged, the project architect, on site every 2 weeks, began to wonder how it would be received by the residents of Speyside.
I think the local community liked it. It was clearly a building of some quality, and I think everybody appreciated that, and they knew what that would do to the local economy, the local tourism, the local workforce opportunities. So I think it was very positively received, and the sympathetic way in which it was a response to the landscape, I think was very well received, both at the formal public consultation that happened as part of the planning process, and then just anecdotally during the course of construction. I think that very appreciative of the fact that it wasn't a sort of arrogant, bombastic gesture.
So I had responsibility for delivering the project, but the day-to-day management was my team, and I think they had some rocky roads, and Graham warned us early doors that we would have some interesting challenges along the way, whether it's materials selection or budget, or one or two serious decisions we had to make with the visitor centre. But we got through it, and I think the relationship was very, very good. The relationship with the architect was very good, as was the relationship with the construction company and the process organisations we used. And we had to work in a collaborative way to deliver what we delivered.
When Rogers, Sturck, Harbour and Partners won the competition to design this distillery, Macallan's idea was that there would be a visitor centre alongside, but separate. Graham Sturck and his team thought it should instead be part of the main building. But the idea of having the public in a space which was also occupied by millions of litres of flammable alcohol would give health and safety officers nightmares.